Hi, my name is Niamh. I'm 42 years old, and I'm currently speaking to you from my apartment just outside of Dublin, Ireland. For most of my adult life, I was the quiet one, the steady one, the one who kept her head down and worked hard as a landscape architect, dreaming of restoring a broken down stone cottage in the Wicklow Mountains that had belonged to my grandmother. I thought that if I played by the rules, if I saved every euro, if I poured my sweat and blood into the soil, I would finally have a sanctuary of my own, a place where I could breathe. I didn't know that building my dream home would nearly cost me my sanity, my financial future, and my relationship with the people I was supposed to trust the most. If you're watching this and you've ever had to stand alone against your own family just to protect what you earned, please hit that subscribe button right now because I have a feeling you're going to understand exactly what I went through. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever been the one who had to say no when everyone else demanded you say yes. I want to take you back to the beginning, before the lawyers and the shouting matches, back when the air was crisp and the only thing I had to worry about was the pH level of the soil. Growing up, the dynamic in our house was invisible to outsiders but crystal clear to me. My older sister Siobhan was the sun everyone orbited around. She was loud, charismatic, beautiful in that effortless, messy way that made people want to forgive her for being late or forgetting her wallet. I was the moon, I suppose. Quiet, reliable. I was the one who remembered birthdays, the one who did the washing up without being asked, the one who got good grades not because I was brilliant, but because I was terrified of disappointing anyone. My parents were good people mostly, but they were exhausted by Siobhan's drama, so they bought peace by giving in to her. If Siobhan wanted the bigger bedroom, she got it because Niamh doesn't mind. If Siobhan needed money for a car, she would inevitably crash. The savings account was raided because Niamh is sensible, she can wait. And I did wait. I waited my whole life thinking that eventually fairness would kick in. I became a landscape architect because I liked the idea of imposing order on chaos. I liked taking a muddy, unloved patch of earth and turning it into something structured and beautiful. It gave me a sense of control I never had inside my own house. The only person who really saw me was my Nana, my mother's mother. She lived out in Wicklow, about an hour south of Dublin, in this ancient, tumbling down farmhouse with a converted stone barn at the back. It wasn't a grand estate, it was rocky, wild, windswept, and covered in gorse and bracken. Siobhan hated it. She called it the middle of nowhere and complained about the smell of damp and the lack of decent phone signal. But I loved it. I loved the gray stone walls that felt like they had grown out of the ground. I loved the way the mist rolled down the valley in the mornings. Nana and I would spend hours in her vegetable patch pulling weeds, her hands gnarled and strong, teaching me that patience was the most important tool you could own. She used to tell me, Niamh, this land knows who loves it. You can't fake it with the land. I clung to that. When Nana got sick, really sick, about 5 years ago, I was the one driving down every weekend. I was the one coordinating with the carers, managing her medication, making sure the roof didn't leak onto her bed. Siobhan would visit occasionally, usually breezing in for an hour with a store-bought cake, taking a selfie with Nana to post on Facebook with a caption like, "My warrior," and then leaving before the kettle had even boiled because she had a dinner reservation or a crisis with her husband, Mark. Mark was complicated. He worked in property development, or at least he talked a lot about property development. He drove a flashy Audi that I'm pretty sure was leased, wore suits that were a little too shiny, and always had a big deal just around the corner. He treated me with this patronizing amusement like I was a child playing in the dirt with my gardening designs. He'd say things like, "Still planting flowers, Niamh? There's no money in flowers, love. Bricks and mortar, that's where the game is." I'd just smile and pour him tea, biting my tongue. When Nana passed, the grief was a heavy, wet blanket. I felt untethered. But amidst the funeral arrangements in the wake, where Siobhan cried louder than anyone and accepted condolences like she was accepting an award, there was a quiet resolve in me. Nana had told me explicitly and repeatedly that she wanted me to have the stone barn. The main farmhouse was falling apart and probably needed to be sold to cover debts, but the barn and the acre of garden around it, she wanted that for me. She knew I had the skills to restore it. She knew it was my heart. The reading of the will was tense. My parents were there, looking anxious. Siobhan and Mark were there, Mark checking his watch every 5 minutes. The solicitor, a dusty old man who had known Nana for 40 years, read it out. The main farmhouse and the bulk of the land were to be sold, the proceeds split between my mother and her brother. But then came the clause I had been praying for. To my granddaughter Niamh, I leave the structure known as the stone barn, along with the curtilage defined in the attached map, to do with as she pleases. I remember letting out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for months. I didn't look at Siobhan immediately, I just looked at my hands, feeling this surge of gratitude. Finally, I had something that was mine. When I did look up, Siobhan looked bored. She whispered something to Mark, who shrugged. They didn't care. To them, it was a pile of rocks with a caved-in roof. It wasn't money, it wasn't liquid, it was a project, and they hated work. The first year after probate cleared was the hardest and the best year of my life. I was still working full-time in Dublin, designing corporate courtyards and suburban back gardens, but every spare cent and every spare minute went into the barn. I sold my car and bought a battered old van. I stopped going out for dinner. I canceled my gym membership. I lived on beans on toast and anxiety. I remember the first time I stood in the barn as the legal owner. The roof was essentially a sieve. The floor was dirt. There were swallows nesting in the rafters. But the walls were 2 feet thick, solid granite. I walked the perimeter of my acre, marking out where the kitchen garden would go, where I'd plant the apple trees, where I'd build the terrace to catch the evening sun. I felt powerful. I hired a local builder, a guy named Calm, who didn't talk much but worked like a machine, to help with the heavy structural stuff. I did the rest. I learned how to point stone. I learned how to lay insulation. I spent my weekends covered in lime dust and bruises. My parents thought I was mad. Why don't you just buy a nice apartment in the city, Niamh? My mother would ask, wringing her hands when I'd show up for Sunday lunch with plaster in my hair. It's so much work. You'll never get a husband living out there in the sticks. Siobhan and Mark never visited, not once in that first year. They were too busy. They had just bought a new build in a fancy estate, heavily leveraged, of course, and Siobhan was busy decorating it with gray velvet furniture and mirrored console tables. When I'd try to show them photos of the barn's progress, the new slate roof, the bespoke oak windows I'd saved for 6 months to buy, Siobhan would glance at her phone and say, "That's nice, Niamh, very rustic." But as the barn started to take shape, as the ruin started to look like a home, the energy shifted. I remember posting a video on my Instagram. It was just a walkthrough of the open plan living space. The light was pouring in through the new skylights, hitting the polished concrete floor. The exposed stone walls looked warm and inviting. I had installed a wood-burning stove, and the fire was crackling. Outside, through the big glass doors, you could see the garden I had started to landscape. Tufts of ornamental grasses, purple verbena, the rolling green hills beyond. That video got a lot of traction. A design blog picked it up. Suddenly, my little project wasn't just a pile of rocks. It was desirable. It was chic. It was eco-luxe. That's when the phone calls started. It began innocently enough. Siobhan called me on a Tuesday night. "Niamh, oh my God, I saw the blog post. The place looks incredible. I can't believe you did all that." "Thanks," I said, wary but pleased. It was nice to hear her say something positive. "Mark and I were thinking, we haven't been down in ages. We should come see it. Maybe this weekend?" I hesitated. I was exhausted. I had just finished tiling the bathroom, and I wanted to spend the weekend sleeping, but this was my sister. And deep down, the little girl in me still wanted her approval. "Sure," I said, "come down for lunch on Sunday." They arrived in the Audi, tires crunching on the gravel driveway I had laid by hand, shovel by shovel. Mark got out, wearing sunglasses, and did a slow 360-degree turn. He didn't look at the view, he looked at the boundaries. He looked at the road access. He looked at the barn like a surveyor. Siobhan hugged me, smelling of expensive perfume that made my nose itch. "Wow," she said, "it's actually livable." "It's more than livable," I said, leading them inside. "It's my home." Lunch was strange. Mark kept asking questions about the valuation. "So what's this place worth now, you reckon?" he asked, chewing on the roast chicken I'd cooked. "I don't know, Mark. I'm not selling it, so it doesn't matter. Everything has a price, Niamh," he smirked. "You've added significant equity here. Smart move. Didn't think you had it in you." "And the land," Siobhan chimed in. "It's bigger than I remember. Nana's garden was always such a mess, I never realized how far back it went." I pointed out the window. "It goes back to the old stone wall near the stream. That's the boundary." Mark stood up and walked to the window. "The stream? That's good frontage. Is that included in your deed?" "Yes," I said, feeling a prickle of annoyance. "The barn and the curtilage, it's all in the papers." "Right," Mark said, tapping his chin. "Right." They left after a few hours, leaving me with a sink full of dishes and a weird feeling in the pit of my stomach. I told myself I was being paranoid. Mark was just obsessed with money. That was his personality. It didn't mean anything. A few weeks later, I got a call from my mother. Her voice was high, tight, the voice she used when she was trying to mediate a fight that hadn't happened yet. "Niamh, love, are you busy?" "Just working on a drawing, Mom. What's up?" "Well, Siobhan and Mark were over for dinner last night. They were talking about the barn." "Oh," I put my pen down. "They're in a bit of a tight spot, love. You know the market is fluctuating, and Mark's had some cash flow issues with his business. Nothing serious, just liquidity." "Okay," I said slowly. "What does that have to do with me?" Well, she paused. "They were saying that since the barn was part of the family estate, and since you got it for free, essentially, I didn't get it for free, I cut in, my voice rising. I inherited a ruin. I spent every penny I have fixing it. I know, she soothed. But the land, Niamh, the land itself has value. Mark thinks, well, he thinks there might be room on that acre for another structure, maybe a small holiday let, something to generate income for the family. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. The family? Mom, the land is mine. It's in my name. I'm not building a holiday let for Mark. It's not for Mark, she said, retreating. It's just, Siobhan is your sister. They're struggling, they have the mortgage, and they're trying for a baby. They just thought, since you have so much space and you're there all alone, there it was, you're there all alone. The implication that because I was single, because I didn't have a husband or kids, I didn't need space, I didn't deserve a sanctuary. My needs were secondary to the real family units. No, I said firmly, absolutely not. The garden is part of the design, it's the whole point of the house. I'm not paving it over so Mark can run an Airbnb. Just think about it, Mom said, her voice turning cold. Don't be selfish, Niamh. We helped you out when you were starting. They hadn't helped me. I paid my own way through college. I paid my own rent. But arguing history with my mother was like shouting at fog. I have to go, Mom, I said, and hung up. I sat in my kitchen, the beautiful kitchen I had tiled myself, and felt the walls closing in. I thought that was the end of it. I thought saying no was enough. I was so naive. 2 days later, I came home from a site visit in Dublin to find a surveyor's van parked at the bottom of my driveway. A man in a high-vis vest was standing in my wildflower meadow with a tripod and a theodolite. I parked my van and stormed over. Can I help you? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked up, checking a clipboard. Just checking the coordinates for the boundary realignment. The what? I stepped closer. Who hired you? This is private property. Mr. Mark Cullen, he said. He's the owner of the adjacent plot, isn't he? He ordered a survey to confirm the access route. My blood ran cold. The adjacent plot, the land around my acre, had been sold off by the executor, my uncle, to pay the debts. I thought it had been bought by a local farmer. Mark Cullen doesn't own the adjacent land, I said. The surveyor shrugged. Paperwork says he's the prospective buyer. Sale agreed. He needs to certify the right-of-way through this driveway to get planning permission for the new builds. New builds. The world tilted on its axis. I realized then what was happening. Mark and Siobhan weren't just asking for a favor. They were making a move. They had bought or were buying the agricultural land surrounding my cottage. And to develop it, to build the cluster of ugly generic houses Mark loved so much, they needed access. The only road access was my driveway. I pulled out my phone and called Mark. He answered on the second ring, sounding breezy. Niamh, how are you keeping? Get your surveyor off my land, Mark. Whoa, calm down. He's not on your land. He's on the easement. There is no easement. It's a private driveway. Nana owned it, and now I own it. Actually, Mark said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming patronizingly soft, if you check the original deeds from 1950, there's a historic right-of-way for agricultural access. We're just upgrading it. You're not bringing heavy machinery down my driveway to build a housing estate, Mark. I will sue you. Niamh, he sighed. Don't be like that. Siobhan is so excited. We're gonna be neighbors. Imagine sisters living side by side. We can help you with the maintenance. It's a win-win. You didn't tell me, I whispered. You came to lunch, you ate my food, and you didn't tell me you were buying the land around me. It's business, Niamh. We didn't want to jinx it until the offer was accepted. Look, let the guy finish his survey. We can sit down this weekend and go over the plans. I think you'll see we're actually increasing the value of your asset. I hung up, I looked at the surveyor, who was watching me with mild disinterest. Get off my property, I said. Love, I'm just doing a job. Get off. He packed up his tripod, muttering under his breath, and reversed his van out onto the main road. I stood there shaking. The peace of the valley, the silence I had paid so dearly for, suddenly felt heavy with threat. I looked at the rolling hills I loved. I imagined them covered in concrete, excavators tearing up the earth, noise, dust, Mark's face smirking at me from over a garden fence. I went inside and dug out my box of documents. The deed, the will, the maps. I spread them out on the kitchen table. I'm a landscape architect. I know how to read site maps. I traced the red line that defined my property. It included the driveway. It was clear. But then I saw the dotted blue line running parallel to the stone wall. Agricultural right-of-way. It was there. It was faint and it was old, but it was there. Nana had never mentioned it because for 50 years nobody had used it. It was for moving sheep, not cement trucks. But Mark knew. He had done his homework. He had spotted the loophole I had missed because I was too busy looking at the sunset. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the floor of the stone barn, the underfloor heating warm beneath my bare feet. I felt a sense of violation that made my skin crawl. It wasn't just the land, it was the secrecy. My own sister had looked me in the eye, hugged me, and all the while she and her husband were plotting to surround me, to use me, to pave over my sanctuary. I called a solicitor the next morning, not the dusty old family one, but a specialist in property law in Dublin, a shark. It's going to be expensive, she told me after reviewing the scans I sent her. If they have sale agreed on the surrounding land, they have a legitimate interest. If that right of way is valid, they can petition to upgrade it for vehicular access. We can fight it, but it depends on the wording of the 1950 deed. And it depends on how much money they have to throw at this. They have money, I said, thinking of the Audi in the shiny suits, or at least they act like they do. Then you need to be prepared for a siege, she said. I hung up and looked at my bank account. I had depleted my savings, renovating the house. I had maybe 2,000 euro left in my emergency fund. I was living paycheck to paycheck, happy but fragile. I couldn't afford a legal war. Mark knew that. He was banking on it. He knew I was the sensible one, the one who avoided conflict, the one who would eventually fold to keep the peace. But looking around my living room, at the exposed beams I had sanded by hand, at the light hitting the vase of wildflowers on the table, something shifted in me. This wasn't just about a driveway. This was about my entire life. This was about every time I had stepped back to let Siobhan shine, every time I had swallowed my needs to accommodate her wants. If I let them do this, if I let them invade this space, I would never be free of them. I would be the little sister in the shadow forever, living in the middle of their housing estate, watching their life from my window. I made a cup of tea, I sat down, and I decided that for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be sensible. I was going to be difficult. I was going to be impossible. The next day, Siobhan called. I didn't answer. She texted, "Stop being dramatic. We need to talk about the access. The architect is waiting." I didn't reply. Instead, I went to the local hardware store. I bought a padlock, a heavy-duty chain, and a private property no entry sign. I drove back to the entrance of my driveway, the only entrance. I wrapped the chain around the old iron gate that hadn't been closed in decades. I snapped the padlock shut. I was in the garden when they arrived that weekend. I heard the car engine first, then the honk. A long, aggressive blast of the horn. I didn't look up. I kept pruning the roses. Another honk. Then I heard Mark's voice shouting, "Niamh, open the bloody gate." I put down my secateurs, wiped my hands on my jeans, and walked slowly down the driveway. They were both out of the car. Siobhan looked furious. Mark looked incredulous. "What is this?" Mark gestured to the chain. "We have a meeting with the architect on the site in 20 minutes. Open it." "No," I said. "Excuse me." Siobhan stepped forward. "Niamh, stop playing games. We bought the land. We need to get in." "You bought the land behind me," I said calmly, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "You didn't buy this driveway. This is mine." "The right of way," Mark shouted, his face turning red. "We have a right of way. For agricultural use," I said, quoting what my solicitor had told me. "For sheep, for cattle, not for Audis, and definitely not for construction equipment. If you want to access your land, buy a helicopter or build your own road from the other side of the hill." "That would cost a fortune," Mark spat. "The gradient is too steep. This is the only viable access." "Sounds like poor due diligence on your part, Mark." Siobhan looked at me, really looked at me like she was seeing a stranger. "Niamh, you're ruining this for us. We need this project. We've already put down the deposit. If we can't get planning, we lose that money. Do you want to bankrupt your own sister?" It was the ultimate guilt trip. The weapon they always used, family. I looked at her. I thought about the lies. I thought about the middle of nowhere. I thought about how she only wanted this place now that I had made it valuable. "I'm not ruining anything, Siobhan," I said. "I'm just protecting my home. You should have asked me before you spent your money." "I'm going to cut this chain," Mark threatened, moving towards the boot of his car. "If you touch that gate," I said, pulling my phone out and hitting record, "I'll call the guards. Criminal damage, trespassing, try me." Mark froze. He looked at the phone, then at me. He saw something in my eyes he hadn't seen before. He slammed the boot shut. "You'll hear from our solicitor," he snarled. "And believe me, Niamh, by the time we're done, we'll own this driveway, and your little cottage too. You're out of your depth. Drive safe," I said. I watched them reverse, tires spinning in anger, throwing gravel everywhere. I waited until they were out of sight before I allowed my knees to give way. I sank down onto the grass, trembling. I had started a war. I knew they would come back, and they would come back harder. I knew my parents would be next, guilt-tripping me, crying. I knew the legal bills would pile up. But as I sat there smelling the damp earth and the pine needles, looking at the stone barn that had stood for 100 years, I knew I wasn't going to back down. They had underestimated me. They thought I was just the gardener. But they forgot one thing about gardeners. We know how to clear the rot. We know how to dig deep. And we're not afraid of a little dirt. The following Monday, the first letter arrived. It wasn't just a threat of legal action regarding the easement. It was a formal contestation of the will itself. They were claiming that Nana wasn't of sound mind when she left me the barn. They were claiming undue influence. They were going for the jugular. I stared at the letter, the legal jargon swimming before my eyes. Undue influence. Because I cared for her. Because I was there when they weren't. I felt a wave of nausea. They were willing to drag Nana's memory through the mud just to get a driveway. This wasn't just business anymore. This was personal. And if they wanted to talk about influence, well, I had kept a diary those last 5 years. I had kept every text, every receipt, every log of who visited and who didn't. I picked up the phone to call my shark solicitor. They've escalated, I said. Good, she replied. That means they're desperate. Now tell me everything about this Mark character. People like that always have skeletons. We just need to find which closet he's hiding them in. I didn't know it then, but digging into Mark's business dealings would uncover something far worse than a property dispute. I was about to find out that my sister's husband wasn't just a bully, he was a fraud. And my sister, she wasn't just a victim of his ambition, she was an accomplice. But that's getting ahead of myself. First, I had to survive the family ambush. My mother called that evening in tears. How could you, Niamh, locking your sister out? Mark is furious. He says you're acting like a lunatic. I'm acting like a homeowner, Mom. They're family. You don't sue family. They sued me first, Mom. They're contesting Nana's will. Did they tell you that? Silence on the line. Then a small, wavering voice. Well, Mark says that's just a tactic to get you to come to the table. If you just agree to the easement, they'll drop the will contest. It's just business negotiation, love. It's blackmail, I said, and I'm not negotiating with terrorists. Niamh, I'm done, Mum. If you want to take their side, that's your choice. But don't call me again to deliver Mark's messages. I blocked my mother's number. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I sat on my kitchen floor and cried for an hour. But when I stood up, the house felt quieter. The air felt cleaner. I spent the next week gathering evidence. I went through old boxes in the attic of the barn. Nana never threw anything away. I found the original surveyor maps from when my grandfather bought the place in the 40s. I found letters. And I found something else. A box of photos from the 90s, when the agricultural land next door was being used for grazing. In one of the photos, there was a fence that clearly blocked off the so-called right-of-way. If I could prove that the access had been blocked for more than 12 years without objection, the right-of-way might be extinguished. Adverse possession. Or at least abandonment. I felt a thrill of the chase. I wasn't just defending, I was hunting. I was scanning the photos into my laptop when I heard a noise outside. It was night, pitch black. The isolation that I loved suddenly felt very real. I heard the crunch of gravel, not a car, footsteps. I turned off the kitchen light and peered out. Flashlights, 2 of them, near the barn. They weren't walking up the driveway. They were walking around the perimeter. I grabbed a heavy Maglite flashlight. I kept by the door and my phone. I didn't call the police immediately. The station was 20 minutes away. I wanted to see who it was. I cracked the door open. Who's there? I shouted, shining my beam into the dark. The light stopped. Then a voice I didn't recognize. Meter reading. At 10 o'clock at night, I yelled. I'm calling the guards. The light scrambled. I heard running. Then the sound of a car engine starting up down on the main road. They were casing the place. Intimidation? Or were they looking for something? I went back inside and locked every bolt. My hands were shaking. I realized then that Mark wasn't just going to fight me in court. He was going to try to scare me out. He wanted me to feel unsafe. He wanted me to pack up and leave so he could take over. I looked at the photo of Nana on my mantelpiece. I'm not going anywhere, I whispered. The next morning, I went to town to install CCTV cameras. As I was walking into the electronics store, I bumped into an old school friend, Sarah. She worked at the local council planning office. Niamh, I haven't seen you in ages, she said. I heard you're doing up the old barn. Yeah, it's been a project, I said, trying to smile. It's funny you mention it, she said, lowering her voice. I saw a planning application cross my desk yesterday for the land next to you. Cullen Developments? That's my brother-in-law, I said grimly. Yeah, well, it's weird, Sarah said. The application, it includes your land, not just the driveway. It has your barn marked for demolition. The world stopped. Demolition? Yeah. Listed as derelict outbuilding to be cleared for site access and landscaping. Niamh, did you sell to him? No, I breathed. I definitely didn't. Then he's filed a fraudulent application, Sarah said, her eyes widening. He's claiming ownership he doesn't have. This was it, the smoking gun. Mark was so arrogant, so sure he would bully me into submission, that he had already filed the plans assuming I was gone, assuming he had won. Sarah, I said, grabbing her arm, can you get me a copy of that application? I shouldn't, she whispered. But if you come by the office later, I can leave it on the counter for public viewing. You can take photos. I walked out of that shop with a fire in my belly that could have burned down the whole of Wicklow. They weren't just trying to share the driveway. They were planning to erase me, to bulldoze my home, my hard work, my Nana's legacy, just to make their development prettier. I got into my van. I wasn't going home. I was going to the planning office. And then I was going to pay my dear brother-in-law a visit at his shiny office in Dublin. The nice, quiet Niamh was dead. The woman driving the van was someone else entirely. And she was ready for blood. I drove to the council offices with the kind of tunnel vision you usually only get after a car accident. I couldn't feel my hands on the steering wheel. All I could see was the road unspooling in front of me and Sarah's terrified face in my mind's eye. Demolition. The word tasted like ash. They weren't just trying to steal a driveway, they were trying to erase me. When I got to the planning office, Sarah was pretending to sort files behind the front counter. The place smelled of stale coffee and photocopier ozone. She didn't look at me directly, just slid a thick folder across the laminate counter and whispered, "You didn't get this from me. You're a member of the public viewing a public file. Page 4 and 5 are what you want." I opened the folder. My hands were shaking so bad I almost ripped the paper. And there it was, a glossy high-definition site map of the Cullen estate. It showed 12 four-bedroom detached houses, all gray render and glass, clustered around a winding access road. And where my stone barn stood, where my grandmother had lived and died, where I had poured my soul into the mortar, there was nothing. Just a hatched red box labeled Phase 2 Landscaping and Communal Green Area. I flipped the page. There was a signed affidavit from Mark Cullen stating that he was the sole owner of the entire site, comprising folios A, B, and C. He had listed my folio number. He had forged a reality where I didn't exist. I took photos of everything, the maps, the signature, the date stamp. My heart was pounding so hard I thought the other people in the waiting area could hear it. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was fraud. High-stakes, deliberate fraud. I handed the folder back to Sarah. She looked pale. "He's rushing it through," she murmured. "He's paid for the expedited review. Niamh, be careful. People don't take risks like this unless they're desperate." I walked out into the rain. It was a cold, miserable Tuesday, the kind where the sky is the color of a bruise. I got back into my van and sat there for a moment, listening to the rain hammer against the roof. I should have gone to the police right then. I know that now. But I was running on adrenaline and rage. I didn't want to fill out a report. I wanted to look him in the eye. I wanted to see him squirm. I drove straight to Dublin. Mark's office was in the Docklands, in one of those glass towers that look impressive but have no soul. I parked the van between a Range Rover and a Porsche, looking completely out of place in my muddy boots and work jacket. I didn't care. I marched past the security desk in the lobby, flashing an old ID badge from a corporate landscaping job I'd done years ago, and got into the elevator. The offices of Cullen Developments were on the 4th floor. It was all polished chrome and white leather. There was a receptionist, a young girl who looked bored, typing on a phone. "Can I help you?" she asked, not looking up. "I'm here to see Mark Cullen." "Do you have an appointment?" "No." "Tell him his sister-in-law is here. Tell him I have the planning file." She blinked, surprised by my tone, and picked up the phone. She whispered something, listened, and then nodded. He says he's in a meeting." "I don't care," I said. I walked past her desk. She stood up, protesting. "Hey, you can't go back there." I pushed open the double glass doors at the end of the hall. Mark was sitting at a massive mahogany desk, but he wasn't in a meeting. He was alone. He was staring at a laptop screen, rubbing his temples. He looked tired, older than I remembered. But when he saw me, the mask slammed back into place. That slick, arrogant smirk returned. "Niamh," he said, leaning back, "to what do I owe the pleasure? Come to hand over the keys?" I didn't say a word. I walked up to his desk and slammed my phone down, screen facing up, showing the photo of the demolition plan. "Explain this," I said. My voice was deadly quiet. He glanced at the photo, then shrugged. "It's a site projection, standard architectural rendering. We visualize the full potential of the land. You listed my house as derelict and marked it for demolition. You signed a document claiming you own my folio. That is perjury, Mark. That is fraud." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Niamh, grow up. It's paperwork. It's a placeholder to get the zoning approved. Once we have the zoning, we amend the plan. I was going to cut you in, you know? offer you a fair price for that pile of rocks once the funding came through. I'm not selling. I told you that. Mark stood up. Suddenly, he wasn't the breezy brother-in-law anymore. He leaned over the desk, his knuckles white. You don't have a choice, Niamh. You think you're playing house out there, but you're sitting on a gold mine, and you're too stupid to mine it. I have investors lined up. I have capital committed. I am not going to let your little hobby farm derail a 10 million euro project. I'm going to the guards, I said. I'm showing them this application. Mark's eyes narrowed. You do that? Go ahead. And while you're doing that, my lawyers will freeze your assets. We'll tie you up in probate court for the next 5 years. We'll contest every penny Nana left you. We'll claim she was senile, that you manipulated her. We'll drag your name through the mud so deep you'll never get a landscaping contract in this country again. Who has deeper pockets, Niamh? Me or you? He was bluffing about the pockets. I suspected that now, but the threat was real. He was willing to destroy everything to win. Why are you so desperate, Mark? I asked, looking around the office. It was too clean, too empty. There were no family photos, no personal touches. Who are these investors, really? A muscle in his jaw twitched. Get out of my office. If you come near my property again, I said, picking up my phone, I won't just call the police. I'll send these photos to every bank in Dublin. I'll blow your zoning out of the water. I turned and walked out. My legs felt like jelly, but I kept my head high until the elevator doors closed. Then I slumped against the metal wall, gasping for air. I had poked the bear. I knew that. But I also knew I had rattled him. He was scared. A man with 10 million euros doesn't forge a signature for a driveway. A man with 10 million euros buys the driveway. He was broke. He was gambling on this development to save him, and I was the glitch in the system. I drove home in a daze. It was dark by the time I got back to Wicklow. The rain had turned into a storm. The wind was howling around the stone barn, rattling the new windows I'd installed. I drove up the road, exhausted, just wanting a hot shower and safety. But when I turned into my driveway, my headlights caught something metallic on the ground. The chain. The heavy-duty chain I had wrapped around the gate was lying in the mud, sliced clean through. The gate was wide open. I slammed on the brakes, my heart hammered against my ribs. I sat there with the engine idling, staring at the open gate. Had they been here? Were they still here? I grabbed the heavy flashlight from the passenger seat. I called out, but the wind snatched my voice away. I drove slowly up the driveway, scanning the darkness. The house looked dark. Normal. I parked and ran to the front door, fumbling with my keys. I got inside, locked it, bolted it, and leaned against the wood, listening. Silence. Just the wind. I walked through the house, turning on every light. Kitchen clear, living room clear, bedroom clear. Nothing seemed to be missing. But then I saw it. On the kitchen table, right in the center, was a muddy boot print. Someone had been inside. They hadn't taken anything. They had just walked in, stood on the table, maybe to check the smoke alarm, or maybe just to show they could, and left. It was a message. We can get in whenever we want. I felt a violation so deep it made me nauseous. I grabbed a cloth and scrubbed the table until the wood was raw. Crying hot, angry tears. They were escalating. Intimidation, gaslighting, breaking and entering. I called my shark solicitor, ignoring the time. She answered on the third ring. They broke in, I choked out. They cut the lock. There's a footprint on my table. Did you call the guards? I'm calling them next. But I need you to know I found the planning application. It's fraud. He's listed my house for demolition. There was a pause on the line. Then she said, send me the photos. Tonight. Niamh, listen to me. This isn't a civil dispute anymore. If he's forging documents and breaking into your home, this is criminal. You need to secure that property. Do not stay there alone if you don't feel safe. I'm not leaving, I said, my voice hardening. That's what they want. If I leave, they'll bulldoze it before I can get an injunction. I'm staying. Then get a dog, she said, a big one, and get those cameras working. I spent that night awake, sitting in the dark living room with a hurley stick across my lap, watching the monitors of the CCTV system I had installed. The wind triggered the motion sensors every 10 minutes, making my heart jump. It was psychological torture. The next morning, the police came. 2 young guards, a man and a woman. They were polite but dismissive. It's a civil matter, mostly, the male guard said, looking at the cut chain. Dispute over access, hard to prove who cut it unless you have video. I have a footprint on my table, I argued. Could be anyone, he shrugged. Did they take anything? No. Then it's trespassing, technically. We'll file a report. But love, if it's family, you're better off sorting it out over a cup of tea than wasting court time. A cup of tea, I wanted to scream. They are trying to steal my home, I said. Well, get a better lock, he advised, and they drove away. I was on my own. The law was too slow. The system was indifferent. If I was going to survive this, I had to stop playing defense. I had to go on the offense. I started digging. I took 2 days off work, called in sick, and turned my living room into a war room. I had the photos of the planning application. Now I needed to know who was funding him. Mark had mentioned investors. I went to the company's registration office website. I pulled the filings for Cullen Developments. The company was bleeding money, 2 years of losses. But 3 months ago, there was a sudden injection of cash, a loan. Not from a bank, from a private holding company called Vantage Holdings Limited. I searched Vantage Holdings, registered in the Isle of Man shell company. Dead end. But then I looked at the directors. One name popped up, Liam O'Shea. I froze. I knew that name. Everyone in Wicklow knew that name. Liam O'Shea wasn't a banker. He was a businessman who owned half the nightclubs in Dublin and a lot of concrete trucks. He was the kind of man you didn't borrow money from unless you had absolutely no other choice, and you definitely didn't default on him. Suddenly, Mark's desperation made sense. He wasn't just worried about losing face. He was in bed with a loan shark. He had probably promised O'Shea the land, my land, as collateral, assuming he could bully me out of it. If he couldn't deliver the development, he couldn't pay O'Shea. And men like O'Shea didn't send solicitors' letters. They sent guys to cut chains and leave boot prints. A cold chill went through me. I wasn't just fighting my greedy brother-in-law. I was standing in the way of a gangster's payout. I needed to talk to Siobhan. She had to know. Or maybe she didn't. Maybe Mark was hiding this from her too. No, she had been there. She had pushed for the sale. She knew they were desperate. I texted her, I know about O'Shea, we need to talk alone, come to the barn. If you bring Mark, I call the police. She arrived an hour later. She looked terrible. Her perfect hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wasn't wearing makeup. She looked 10 years older than she had at the funeral. She walked into the kitchen and refused the tea I offered. She stood by the island, wrapping her coat around herself. How do you know that name? She whispered. I did my homework, Siobhan. Unlike Mark. She flinched. He's a legitimate investor. He's a thug, Siobhan. Mark borrowed money from a thug to buy the land around me, didn't he? And he promised him my land too. Siobhan crumbled. She sat on the stool and put her head in her hands. We were going to lose the house, she sobbed. The mortgage. Mark's business went under last year. He didn't tell anyone. We're broke, Niamh. Maxed out credit cards. The car is on a lease we haven't paid in 3 months. This development, it was the Hail Mary. If we get the zoning, the land value triples instantly. We could pay off O'Shea, pay off the mortgage. Everything would be fine. So you decided to steal my house, I asked, my voice trembling. To save your own skin, you decided to bulldoze mine? We weren't going to steal it, she cried, looking up, eyes red. Mark said he'd build you a nice apartment in the complex. Brand new, no damp, no maintenance. He said it would be better for you. He lied to you, Siobhan. Look, I showed her the planning document, the demolition order, the absence of any apartment for me. He was going to leave me with nothing, and you were helping him. She stared at the map. She truly looked shocked. Maybe she had believed the lie. Or maybe she had just chosen to believe it because the truth was too ugly. He said, you agreed in principle, she whispered. He forged my consent, Siobhan. And now he's got O'Shea breathing down his neck. Do you realize what you've done? You've brought dangerous people to my doorstep. They broke in last night. That wasn't Mark, she said quickly, too quickly. I know it wasn't Mark. Mark doesn't get his boots muddy. It was O'Shea's men, wasn't it? Putting the frighteners on. Siobhan nodded, tears streaming down her face. They want the site access cleared. Mark told them you were being difficult. He told them to handle it. Handle it? I slammed my hand on the counter. He put a hit out on me. Is that what you're saying? No, just pressure, scare tactics. Mark said they wouldn't hurt you. Mark is an idiot, I said cold. And you're an idiot for trusting him. Help us, Niamh, she begged, reaching for my hand. Please, if this deal falls through, O'Shea will take everything. Our house, Mark's reputation. We could go to jail for the debts. Just open the gate. Let them put the road in. We can fight about the money later. Just let the trucks in so O'Shea sees progress. Please, for family. I looked at my sister. I saw the fear in her eyes, but I also saw the selfishness. Even now, facing ruin, she wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was asking for my sacrifice. She wanted me to pay for their mistakes. Again, just like when we were kids. Niamh doesn't mind. Niamh is sensible. I pulled my hand away. No, I said. Siobhan's face hardened. The sadness vanished, replaced by a flash of that old, entitled anger. You selfish bitch, she spat. You'd watch us burn over a piece of grass? It's not grass, Siobhan. It's my home, and I'm not setting myself on fire to keep you warm anymore. You'll regret this, she stood up, wiping her face. Mark was trying to be nice, but if you back him into a corner, he'll do whatever it takes. He already has, I said. Get out. She left. I locked the door behind her. I felt sick, physically sick, but also strangely clear. The lines were drawn. There was no going back. But I knew Siobhan was right about one thing. Mark was cornered, and a cornered rat doesn't fight fair. I needed to secure the perimeter. I needed help, and I needed to make sure that if anything happened to me, the world would know exactly who did it. I sat down at my computer and started typing. I wrote everything down: the timeline, the threats, the break-in, O'Shea's name, Mark's fraud. I compiled the photos, the documents, the recordings of our phone calls. I created a dead man switch email. If I didn't log in every 24 hours to reset it, it would automatically send the entire file to the Garda Fraud Squad, my solicitor, and 3 major newspapers. It felt melodramatic. It felt like a movie. But looking at the boot print that was still faintly visible on my table, I knew it was necessary. That night, the attack started in earnest. It began with the noise. Around 2 a.m., a truck pulled up on the main road, just outside my boundary. It didn't drive in, it just sat there, engine revving, high beams flooding my windows. It stayed for an hour. I called the guards. By the time they arrived, the truck was gone. Probably just a breakdown, they said. The next night, the power went out. I checked the fuse box fine. I went outside with my flashlight and my dog. I had borrowed a friend's German Shepherd, a big, scary-looking softie named Buster, and checked the meter box on the external wall. The wires had been pulled out, not cut, ripped. I was living in a siege. I called a contractor to fix it, paying double for an emergency call-out. He looked at the wires and shook his head. Someone did this on purpose, love. You got enemies? You have no idea, I said. I knew I couldn't sustain this. I was exhausted. I was jumping at shadows. I needed to end it. I needed to cut the head off the snake. Mark was the weak link. O'Shea was just the muscle. But Mark was the one who had committed the fraud. If I could prove the fraud publicly, the planning permission would be revoked. The deal would collapse. O'Shea would walk away or turn on Mark. It was dangerous. It would destroy my sister's life, but they had left me no choice. I decided to go to the local town hall meeting that was happening that Thursday. The council was discussing local development plans. I knew Mark would be there schmoozing the councilors, trying to grease the wheels for his zoning application. I was going to crash the party. I printed 20 copies of the fraudulent application. I printed the photos of the derelict house that was actually my pristine home. I put on my best blazer, brushed my hair, and drove to the town hall. The room was packed. Mark was at the front, wearing his shiny suit, pointing at a projector screen that showed his beautiful fake visualization of the estate. He was talking about community, about jobs, about progress. I stood at the back, clutching my stack of papers. My heart was in my throat. This was it, the nuclear option. I waited for the Q&A session. Any questions from the floor? The chairperson asked. I raised my hand. Mark saw me. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he recovered. He probably thought I was going to make an emotional plea about traffic or noise. He didn't know what I was holding. Yes, the lady in the back, the chair said. My name is Niamh, I said, my voice ringing out clear and strong in the silent hall. I am the owner of the property at the center of this proposed development. We've addressed the access issues, Niamh, Mark said smoothly into the microphone. If we could keep this to relevant planning concerns. My concern is relevant, I said, walking down the aisle. Because according to the application you submitted to this council, my home is listed as derelict and marked for demolition. You also submitted a sworn affidavit that you own the land. I have the title deeds here that prove you are lying. A murmur went through the crowd. Mark's face went gray. This is not the place, he stammered. I think it is, I said, reaching the front row. I handed the first packet of documents to the chairperson. I handed the next to the local reporter sitting in the front row. This man is committing fraud, I said, turning to face the room. He does not own the land, he does not have access, and he is lying to his investors and to this council. The room erupted. Mark lunged for the microphone, shouting, "She's hysterical! It's a family dispute!" But it was too late. The chairperson was looking at the documents. The reporter was taking photos. Mark looked at me with pure hatred. If looks could kill, I would have dropped dead on the parquet floor. I looked back at him, calm, steady. I had just detonated his life, and I stood there waiting for the fallout. I didn't know then that the fallout would be literal. I didn't know that by humiliating him, I had taken away the only thing holding back the violence. I thought I had won. I thought the law would take over. I was wrong. The law takes time. Fire is much faster. The drive home felt triumphant. I called my solicitor. I did it. It's out. The council knows. Stay somewhere else tonight, she warned. Seriously, Niamh, get a hotel. I can't, I said. I have Buster, and I'm not letting them think they ran me out. Stubbornness. It's a family trait. It was my greatest strength and my biggest weakness. I went home, I fed Buster, I poured a glass of wine, I sat in my beautiful living room, looking out at the dark garden. I felt safe. The truth was out. Then around midnight, Buster started growling, a low, deep rumble in his chest. I looked at the CCTV monitors. Nothing. The cameras were dark. They had cut the power again, but this time they had cut the phone line too. And then I smelled it. Smoke. Thick, acrid smoke rolling under the front door. They weren't trying to scare me anymore. They were burning me out. I dropped the wine glass. It shattered on the floor, but the sound was instantly swallowed by the roar that was starting to build outside, a low, guttural whoosh like a train entering a tunnel. Smoke wasn't just rolling under the door anymore, it was pumping in, thick and black, and tasting of chemicals, petrol. They had used petrol. Panic is a strange thing. You think you'll scream, you think you'll run, but I didn't do either. I froze. My brain tried to process the impossible fact that my house was on fire. I stood there staring at the door, watching the paint start to bubble, paralyzed by the sheer audacity of it. It was Buster who saved me. The dog slammed his body against my legs, barking a sharp, frantic sound that snapped me back into the room. The smoke alarm finally caught up, shrieking overhead, a piercing drill that vibrated in my teeth. I grabbed the collar of his coat. "Come on," I coughed, the smoke already stinging my eyes, making them water so hard I was half blind. I couldn't go out the front. The heat radiating from that side of the house was already intense. The back doors, the beautiful bifold glass doors I had installed to look out at the meadow. I stumbled through the living room, keeping low. The smoke was gathering at the ceiling, a rolling black cloud that looked like a living thing. I reached the glass doors and fumbled for the key I always left in the lock. It wasn't there. I patted the floor, frantic. I must have knocked it out when I was locking up earlier. The fire was louder now, a crackling, popping violence that sounded like gunshots as the old timber beams in the hallway caught. I couldn't find the key. I grabbed a heavy cast iron candlestick from the dining table. I wrapped my cardigan around my hand. "Back, Buster," I screamed. I swung the iron base as hard as I could against the double glazing. It bounced off. Tough safety glass. Of course, I had paid extra for security. Now that security was going to kill me, I swung again, screaming with the effort, putting every ounce of my rage and fear into the blow. The glass spider-webbed. One more hit. It shattered, raining diamonds onto the patio. The rush of fresh oxygen fed the fire behind me. I felt a blast of heat shove me forward, scorching the back of my neck. I scrambled through the broken glass, dragging Buster with me, cutting my hands, my knees, not feeling any of it. We tumbled out onto the wet grass of the garden. I didn't stop. I ran until my lungs burned, dragging the dog, putting 50 yards between me and the house before I turned around. The sight broke me. The front of the stone barn, my sanctuary, was a wall of orange flame. The old wooden door was gone. The flames were licking up the stonework, reaching for the eaves. I saw the silhouette of the roof, the slate I had laid with my own hands, silhouetted against the inferno. I fell to my knees in the mud, gasping, coughing up black soot. I fumbled for my phone in my pocket. Miraculously, I had shoved it in there when the dog growled. I dialed 999, my fingers slick with blood from the glass cuts. "Fire," I rasped to the operator. "My house is on fire. Someone set it on fire. Is anyone inside, love?" "Just me. I'm out. I'm out." I sat there in the rain, clutching the dog, watching my dream burn. And then I saw them, two figures, down by the road, illuminated by the headlights of a car that had just pulled up. They weren't running away. They were watching. Just for a second, checking their work. Then they jumped into the car, a dark sedan, not Mark's Audi, and sped off into the night. It wasn't Mark. Mark wouldn't have the stomach to watch. This was professional. This was O'Shea. The next hour was a blur of flashing blue lights. The fire brigade arrived first. Big men in yellow gear shouting, hoses uncoiling like giant snakes. They pushed me back, wrapped a foil blanket around me, treated me like a victim. I wanted to tell them I was a warrior, that I had fought for this place, but I couldn't speak. I just sat on the bumper of the ambulance, shivering, watching them pump water into my living room. The steam hissed and billowed, white clouds mixing with the black smoke. The guards arrived next. Different ones this time. Older, more serious. A detective. "Miss Cullen?" he asked, looking at my soot-stained face. "It's Ms. O'Connor," I corrected, my voice a croak. "Cullen is the man who did this. We need to get you to the hospital, love. Smoke inhalation." "I'm not going," I said, gripping the blanket. "I'm not leaving my property. You can't stay here. It's a crime scene, and it's structurally unsafe." I looked at the barn. The fire was out now. The front was blackened. The door frame a charred gap like a missing tooth. The roof had held, mostly, but there were holes. The smell was wet and acrid, the smell of dead fire. I'll sit in my van, I said, but I'm not leaving. They eventually forced me to go to the A&E to get my hands stitched up and my lungs checked. I left Buster with a neighbor down the road, a nice farmer named Pat who had seen the flames and come running. Lying in the hospital bed, listening to the beeping of machines, the adrenaline finally crashed. I shook so hard my teeth chattered. I closed my eyes and saw the flames again. I saw the bubbling paint. I saw the map with the demolition order. Mark had tried to erase the house with paper. When that didn't work, he tried to erase it with fire. My phone buzzed on the bedside table. It was 4 a.m. A text from Siobhan. I heard, "Oh my God, Niamh, are you okay? Mark is freaking out. He says he didn't do it. Please call me." I didn't reply. Mark was freaking out. Not because I was almost burned alive, but because he knew he had lost control of the monster he had unleashed. He had hired a shark, and the shark had decided to eat the whole tank. I discharged myself at dawn. I took a taxi back to the barn. The driver went quiet when we turned into the driveway. "Jesus, love," he whispered. "You lucky to be alive." "Yeah," I said, "lucky." I walked up to the house. In the cold light of morning, it looked like a corpse. The stone was scorched. The windows were blown out. The inside, I stepped through the gap where the front door used to be. The hallway was gone. Just charcoal and water. The living room was a mess of sodden plaster and debris. My furniture, the pieces I had saved for, the rug I had bought in Morocco, everything was ruined. But the walls, the 2-foot thick granite walls Nana's father had built, they were standing. They were black, yes, but they hadn't moved. The structure was sound. I walked into the kitchen. The fire hadn't reached here fully, but the smoke damage was everywhere. Everything was covered in a thick, oily film of soot. I ran my finger along the island counter. Black dust. I wasn't defeated. I thought I would be. I thought standing in the ashes of my life would break me. But instead, I felt something cold and hard settling in my chest. A clarity. They had tried to kill me. This wasn't a property dispute anymore. This was a war for survival. And in a war, you don't file complaints. You return fire. I went to my van, which was miraculously untouched, parked around the side. I grabbed a crowbar and a heavy padlock I kept in my toolkit. I walked to the front door, or what was left of it, and I nailed a piece of plywood over the gap. It wasn't secure, not really, but it was a statement. Occupied. I drove to the hardware store in town. I looked like a banshee hair wild, clothes smelling of smoke, bandages on my hands. People stared. I didn't care. I bought a generator. I bought floodlights. I bought a new door. I bought heavy-duty bolts. The owner of the store, a man I'd known for years, looked at me with pity. "Niamh, maybe you should just stay with family for a bit." "I don't have a family," I said. "I have an arsonist and his wife." I spent the day securing the house. I boarded up the broken windows. I set up the generator. I cleaned one room, the back bedroom that was least damaged, and set up a cot. I got Buster back from Pat. The dog was skittish, sniffing the burnt air and whining, but he settled when I fed him a steak I'd bought. Around 6 p.m., the detective returned. "We found traces of an accelerant," he said, standing in my ruined hallway. "Petrol poured through the letterbox and around the frame. It's definitely arson." "I know who did it," I said. "Liam O'Shea, on behalf of Mark Cullen." The detective sighed. "We've questioned Mr. Cullen. He was in a pub in Dublin from 8 p.m. until 2 a.m. CCTV confirms it. He has witnesses. And Mr. O'Shea, well, he's a businessman. Unless we have a witness who saw him lighting the match or forensic evidence linking him." "I saw 2 men," I said, "in a dark sedan." "Did you get a plate?" "No." "Then it's your word against theirs. We're investigating, Niamh. But these things take time." Time. I didn't have time. O'Shea wasn't going to stop because the guards were filling out paperwork. He had failed to burn it down. He would be angry. "Am I under protection?" I asked. "We'll have a patrol car pass by every few hours," the detective promised. "But we can't station someone here 20. Seriously, love, go to a hotel." I watched him leave. I was alone again. I sat on my cot, the generator humming outside, a single lamp illuminating the soot-stained walls. I took out my laptop. I had sent the Dead Man Switch email manually the night before, right after the fire, to the fraud squad, but Mark was still walking free. Why? Because white-collar fraud takes months to untangle, and arson by proxy is hard to prove. Mark was insulated. He thought he was clever. I needed to get to him directly. I needed to make him more afraid of me than he was of O'Shea. I picked up my phone and dialed Siobhan. She answered on the first ring. "Niamh? Oh, thank God. Where are you?" "I'm at the barn." "What? You can't be there. It's burnt. It's still standing. Listen to me, Siobhan. Put Mark on the phone. He's not here. He's meeting with his solicitor." Liar, I can hear him breathing. Put him on. A pause, then rustling. Niamh, Mark's voice. He sounded wrecked, hoarse. You missed, I said. I didn't do it, Niamh. I swear on my life. I was in the pub. I was drunk. After the town hall, I just wanted to get drunk. I know you didn't light the match, Mark. You're a coward. You paid O'Shea to scare me, and he decided to torch me. That's on you. My blood is on your hands. It wasn't supposed to go this far, he whispered. He said he'd just break some windows, make noise. I owe him money, Niamh. A lot of money. He's squeezing me. He saw the town hall thing on the news. He thinks I'm losing control of the asset. He wanted to clear the site. Well, he failed. The site is still occupied. And now I'm angry. Niamh, please, just sell. I can get you a settlement. O'Shea will back off if he gets the land. If you stay there, he'll come back. He's an animal. I have a proposition for you, Mark, I said, my voice steady. I'm going to make you an offer. What? Meet me tomorrow, just you, no Siobhan, no lawyers, at the old quarry on the north side of the valley, noon. Why? Because I have something that belongs to you. And if you want to stay out of prison for fraud, and if you want to keep O'Shea from breaking your legs, you'll come. What do you have? Come and find out. I hung up. I didn't have anything new, but I knew Mark. He was greedy and he was terrified. He would come. I spent the night preparing. I wasn't building a weapon. I was building a trap. I went through the documents again. I looked at the loan agreements I had found on the public record for other companies O'Shea was linked to. I found a pattern. He used shell companies to buy distressed assets, then leveraged them to launder money. Mark wasn't just a borrower, he was a mule. If I could prove that Mark knew the money was dirty, he wasn't just looking at fraud charges. He was looking at money laundering. 10 years, minimum. I slept for 3 hours, gripping the handle of a hammer. Every noise outside made me jump, but nobody came. Maybe the police patrol was working, or maybe O'Shea was regrouping. The next day, the quarry was gray and windswept. It was a desolate place, abandoned years ago, just rock and pools of stagnant water. I parked my van so it was facing the entrance. I waited. At 11:58, the Audi pulled up. It was dirty. Mark hadn't washed it, a small sign of his unraveling. He got out. He was wearing a tracksuit, not a suit. He looked unshaven, his eyes hollow. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. I got out of the van. I kept my distance. You look like hell, I said. You look like you've been in a fire, he shot back, but there was no bite in it. He looked at my bandaged hands and flinched. Does it hurt? Only when I make a fist, I said, which is often.
What do you want, Niamh?
I can't stop O'Shea. I tried calling him. He's not answering my calls anymore. He's taken over the project. He considers the land his. He can't take the land if you don't own it, I said. I don't own it yet. That's the problem. I need the zoning to get the bank loan to pay him off. You're never getting the zoning, Mark. I blew that up at the town hall. That deal is dead. The council will never sign off on it now. Mark rubbed his face. Then I'm dead. Literally. If I don't pay him back, Niamh, you don't understand. These people, they don't sue. I know, I said. They use petrol. I took a step closer. But you have leverage, Mark. You just don't see it. What leverage? I'm broke and I'm compromised. You know how his operation works. You know the accounts. You know the names of the shell companies. You signed the papers. So you're gonna turn King's evidence. Mark laughed, a high hysterical sound. Snitch on Liam O'Shea? Are you mad? He'd kill me before I finished the sentence. He's gonna kill you anyway, Mark, I shouted. Do you think once he takes my land, he's gonna let you walk away? You're a loose end. You're the liability who messed up the planning. Once he has the asset, you're gone. Mark went still. He knew I was right. So what's the alternative, he whispered. We take him down. Together. He stared at me. You and me? You give me the financial records, the emails, the proof that he's laundering money through your development. I combine that with the evidence of the arson. I go to the Criminal Assets Bureau, not the local guards, the CAB. They freeze his assets instantly. He can't pay his goons if his accounts are frozen. And what happens to me? You go to jail, I said bluntly, for the fraud. But you go to a safe jail, protective custody, and you serve maybe 2 years instead of 10. And more importantly, you stay alive, and Siobhan stays alive. Mark looked at the ground. He kicked a stone into a puddle. Siobhan, she didn't know about the petrol. She really didn't. I know, but she knew about the theft. She's complicit, Mark. If you do this, you can cut a deal to keep her out of it. Take the fall. Be a man for once in your miserable life. He looked up at me. I saw the struggle in his face. Fear of O'Shea versus fear of prison versus fear of me. I can't, he said. I can't do it. He'll find me. He's going to find you tonight, Mark, I said. He's going to come for the money you don't have. What are you going to tell him? That your sister-in-law is still breathing? He's going to take it out on you. I turned to walk back to my van. I'm going to the CAB anyway, Mark. I have enough to start an investigation. But without your records, it'll be slower. And in that time, O'Shea will remain free. It's your choice. Die a coward or live a prisoner. I opened the van door. Wait, I paused. Mark reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a USB drive, a small silver stick. I made a backup, he said, his voice trembling. Just in case. It has the ledgers, the true ledgers, not the ones we showed the revenue. He held it out. His hand was shaking so bad he almost dropped it. If I give you this, you have to promise to help Siobhan. She can't go to jail. She's pregnant, Niamh. The world stopped for a second. Pregnant. My sister. She didn't tell me, I whispered. We found out last week. That's why she was so desperate for the money, for the baby. I felt a wave of nausea. A baby. Into this mess. I walked back and took the USB drive from his hand. It felt cold. I'll protect her, I said. But you need to disappear. Go to the guards now. Today. Tell them you want to turn witness. Do not go home. I have to get Siobhan, he said. No. I grabbed his arm. If you go home, O'Shea might be watching. Call her. Tell her to meet you at the station. Mark nodded. He looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw my brother-in-law, not the property developer. I saw the scared boy Siobhan had fallen in love with. I'm sorry, Niamh, he said. About the barn. I really am. Go, I said. He got into his Audi and drove away. I stood in the quarry, clutching the USB drive. I had the smoking gun. I had the map to the bodies. I got into my van. I needed to get this to Dublin, to the Criminal Assets Bureau, immediately. I started the engine. I put it in gear, and then I saw it, blocking the exit of the quarry. A black Range Rover, not a sedan, a Range Rover. The window rolled down. It was a man I had never seen before. Thick neck, shaved head. He didn't wave. He just pointed a finger at me. Then 3 more men got out. They weren't O'Shea's usual thugs. These guys were bigger, harder. Mark had been followed, and now I was trapped in a dead-end quarry with the evidence that could bury them all. I looked at the terrain, rock walls on 3 sides, the Range Rover blocking the only road. I looked at my van. It was a Transit, heavy but old. I locked the doors. I looked at the USB drive in my hand. I shoved it into my bra. The men started walking towards me. They were carrying baseball bats. One had a crowbar. I reversed the van until my bumper hit the rock wall. Come on, Niamh, I whispered to myself. Think. There was no way out, unless I looked at the pile of scree-loose rocks on the left side of the entrance. It was a steep slope, meant for dump trucks, not vans. It was overgrown with brambles. It led up to the ridge line, and from there, across the fields to the main road. It was suicide. The van could flip. The men were running now. They knew I was cornered. I revved the engine. Hold on, Buster, I yelled to the empty passenger seat, wishing the dog was here. Glad he wasn't. I slammed the van into first gear and floored it. I didn't drive at them. I drove at the wall. At the last second, I wrenched the wheel to the left, mounting the scree slope. The van roared, tires spinning, spraying rocks everywhere. The back end fishtailed. I felt the vehicle tip, gravity fighting the engine. Go on, I screamed, slamming the steering wheel. The van lurched up the slope, bouncing violently. I heard metal crunching on rock. The windscreen cracked as a stone flew up. I looked in the mirror. The men had stopped. They were watching, open-mouthed. The van crested the ridge, catching air for a split second, before slamming down onto the grass of the upper field. I didn't stop. I drove across the muddy field, the suspension screaming, heading for the fence line. I smashed through the wooden fence, splinters flying, and landed on the tarmac of the upper road. I had escaped. I drove like a maniac towards the motorway. My hands were bleeding again through the bandages. My heart was going 1,000,000 miles an hour. I called the detective. I have the evidence, I shouted into the phone, and I have a tail. I'm coming to Dublin. I need an escort. Where are you? N11, heading north. Black Transit. They followed Mark. They know I have the files. Stay on the line, Niamh. We're dispatching units. I looked in the rearview mirror. The Range Rover was there. Far back, but gaining it wasn't over. The chase was on, and I was driving a gardener's van against a tank. I pressed my foot to the floor and prayed to Nana. Don't let them take it. Not now. I pinned the accelerator to the floor mat. The steering wheel was vibrating so hard in my hands I thought my wrists would snap. My poor old van, a vehicle designed for carrying bags of cement and trays of pansies at a sedate 60 kilometers an hour, was screaming at 120. The engine temperature gauge was climbing into the red. I could smell the clutch burning, a hot metallic stench that filled the cab. In the rearview mirror, the black Range Rover was a shark closing in on a fishing boat. It was huge, sleek, and terrifyingly stable. I could see the silhouette of the driver, calm and focused. They weren't trying to run me off the road yet. They were waiting for a quiet stretch. The N11 was busy, cars weaving around me, horns honking as I undertook a lorry in the slow lane. I was a maniac in a white van, the kind of driver you curse at on your commute, but I was driving for my life. My phone, thrown onto the passenger seat, was still connected to the detective. "I'm passing the exit for Bray," I shouted. "They're right on my bumper. Where are you?" "2 minutes, Niamh. Keep your speed up. Do not stop. Do not pull over." "I can't keep this up. The engine is going to blow." Then the Range Rover made its move. We hit a stretch of road where the traffic thinned out. The driver surged forward, coming up alongside me on the driver's side. I looked over. The window was down. The man with the shaved head, the one from the quarry, was staring at me. He didn't have a gun. This isn't America. He had the vehicle. He jerked his steering wheel to the left. Bang! The impact sounded like a bomb going off. The side of the van crumpled. I was thrown against the door, my head cracking against the glass. The van lurched toward the ditch on the left. I screamed, wrestling the wheel, fighting the physics of a top-heavy vehicle trying to roll over. I managed to correct it, swerving back into the middle lane, tires screeching, smoke pouring from the wheel arch, where the metal was rubbing against rubber. "He came at me again. He's ramming me," I screamed into the phone. "He's trying to flip me." "See the bridge ahead, Niamh?" The detective's voice crackled. "The overpass? Yes, get under it now." I didn't know why, but I floored it. The Range Rover pulled back for a second, preparing for a final fatal strike. I saw the concrete bridge looming. I saw the shadows underneath. And then I saw the lights. Blue lights, everywhere. On the bridge, on the slip road, and screaming down the opposite lane, jumping the median strip. 2 BMW X5s, marked with the red and yellow Battenberg of the Armed Support Unit. They didn't just merge, they attacked. One of the police SUVs swerved directly in front of the Range Rover, slamming on its brakes. The other boxed it in from the side. I shot past them, under the bridge, watching in my rearview mirror as the Range Rover slammed into the back of the police vehicle, crumbling its bonnet. Men in tactical gear swarmed out of the police cars, weapons drawn. "Armed garde, get out of the vehicle, now." I kept driving. I didn't know how to stop. My foot was welded to the pedal. I was hyperventilating, crying, laughing hysterically. "Niamh," the detective said, his voice calm. "Pull over. It's over. Pull over safely." I eased off the gas. The van shuddered, slowing down. I pulled into the hard shoulder about half a mile down the road. I turned off the engine. The silence was deafening. My hands were locked onto the wheel. I literally couldn't open my fingers. A minute later, a regular patrol car pulled up behind me. A uniformed officer walked up to my window. He looked at the smashed side of my van, then at me. "Miss O'Connor?" I nodded. "You're safe now. We have them in custody." He had to help me out of the van. My legs wouldn't work. I stumbled onto the grass verge, the cold wind hitting my face, and promptly threw up. The officer didn't flinch. He just handed me a bottle of water and wrapped a heavy jacket around my shoulders. "The USB," I whispered, fumbling at my chest. "I have the drive. Detective Brennan is on his way. Keep it on you until he gets here." I sat in the back of the patrol car watching the traffic crawl past the scene behind us. I felt numb. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like something fragile that had been dropped from a great height. When Detective Brennan arrived, he looked like he hadn't slept either. He got into the back seat with me. "You have it?" I reached into my bra and pulled out the small silver stick. It was warm from my skin. "This is everything," I said. "Mark Cullen's private ledgers. Proof of money laundering. Proof of the arson payments, everything." He took it, placing it into an evidence bag like it was a holy relic. "You did good, Niamh. You did incredibly good. But we need to get you out of here. O'Shea has a long reach." They took me to a secure station in Dublin. I spent the next 12 hours in a windowless room, drinking terrible coffee and answering questions. I told them everything. The will, the driveway, the planning fraud, the threats, the fire, the quarry. I watched the clock on the wall tick. Every hour that passed, I knew, was an hour where Mark was either turning himself in or running. I prayed he had gone to the guards, for Siobhan's sake. Around 10 p.m., the door opened. Brennan walked in. He looked satisfied. "We got him," he said. "Liam O'Shea. Based on the data in the drive, the SAEB executed a warrant on his offices an hour ago. We found matching records. He's been arrested. Bail denied. And the men in the Range Rover, his enforcers, charged with attempted murder, dangerous driving, endangerment. They're not going anywhere." I let out a breath, and Brennan's face changed. He sat down opposite me. "Mark Cullen surrendered himself at Bray Station 3 hours ago. He was distressed. He's given a full statement corroborating your evidence. He's being held in protective custody. Is Siobhan with him?" "No, he came alone." Your sister is at her home. We've sent a unit to notify her and secure the premises just in case. Siobhan, alone in that big gray empty house, pregnant, husband in jail, sister almost killed. I need to see her, I said. I wouldn't advise it, Niamh. Not tonight. Emotions are high. She's my sister. She's pregnant. I need to tell her that I didn't want this to happen. You didn't make this happen, Brennan said firmly. They did. Remember that. They put me up in a hotel that night with the guard outside the door. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the impact of the Range Rover. I felt the heat of the fire. I turned on the TV to drown out the silence. It was on the late news, major operation by the Criminal Assets Bureau. Prominent Dublin businessman Liam O'Shea arrested. Property developer Mark Cullen assisting with inquiries, allegations of arson and intimidation in County Wicklow. My landscaping designs had never made the news. My war had. The next morning I checked out. The threat was gone. O'Shea was locked up, his assets frozen, his empire crumbling under the weight of the digital paper trail I had handed over. I was free. But I didn't feel free. I felt heavy. I picked up my rental car. The police had impounded my van for evidence and drove to Siobhan's house. The estate was quiet. The curtains were drawn. Mark's Audi was gone. I rang the doorbell. No answer. I rang again. Siobhan, it's Niamh. Please. The door opened. Siobhan stood there. She was wearing a dressing gown. Her face was swollen, her eyes almost shut from crying. She looked at me, then at the bandage on my head, the cuts on my hands. For a second, I thought she would hug me. I thought the sheer relief that we were both alive would bridge the gap. Instead, she stepped back. You happy now? She croaked. Her voice was dead. Siobhan, he's gone. Niamh. They took him. Handcuffs in front of the neighbors. They said he might get 5 years. 5 years. He turned himself in, I said gently. He did the right thing in the end. It will help his case. He turned himself in because you forced him. She screamed, stepping forward, her hands balling into fists. You cornered him. You ruined us. He tried to burn my house down, Siobhan. He hired men who tried to kill me on the motorway yesterday. Did he tell you that? Did he tell you I almost died? He didn't mean for that to happen. He was just desperate. He was trying to provide for us, for this family. She gestured to her stomach. And now I have nothing. The bank is going to take this house. The accounts are frozen. I have a baby coming in 6 months, and I have no husband, no money, and no home. Are you satisfied? Is your precious pile of rocks worth that? I stood on the doorstep, stunned. She was twisting it. She was rewriting the narrative in real time to make herself the victim. It was breathtaking. I didn't choose this, I said, my voice shaking. You chose this. You chose greed. You chose to try and steal from me. I just defended myself. You could have shared, she spat. You have no one. You're alone. You could have let us build the houses. We would have been happy. But no, you had to be the martyr. You had to be Saint Niamh with her organic garden and her principles. She started to close the door. Siobhan, please. We're sisters. I can help you. I won't let you starve. She looked at me through the crack in the door. Her eyes were cold, filled with a lifetime of resentment I had never fully understood until that moment. I don't want your help. I don't want to see you. You put my husband in jail. As far as I'm concerned, I don't have a sister. The door slammed. The lock clicked. I stood there for a long time. I looked at the generic manicured shrubbery in her front garden. I looked at the gray velvet curtains. I walked back to the car. I sat in the driver's seat and cried. Not for the house, not for the fear, but for the loss of the illusion. I had spent my whole life trying to earn their love, trying to be good enough. And the moment I stopped being a doormat, they hated me for it. Brennan was right. I didn't do this, but God, it felt like I had. I drove back to Wicklow. I drove back to the stone barn. The police tape was still fluttering in the wind. The plywood was still on the door. The smell of smoke was still in the air. I walked inside. It was cold. The heating was off. I walked through the blackened hallway into the kitchen. My footprints in the soot were the only sign of life. I sat on the soot-stained island. I looked out the window at the land. My land. It was safe. The demolition order would be voided. The fraud was exposed. No one was going to build a housing estate here. The birds were singing in the apple trees I had planted. I had won. I was the queen of the ashes. The next few weeks were a blur of legalities. I gave statements. I met with the insurance adjusters. I hired a contractor to start the structural repairs. The insurance company was difficult at first, given the arson, but the police report cleared me of any involvement. And since Mark wasn't a named resident, the policy held. They would pay. The house would be rebuilt. But the joy was gone. I worked mechanically. I sanded the smoke damage off the walls. I ripped out the ruined floorboards. I worked until my muscles screamed, just to stop my brain from thinking. I was lonely, a deep, hollow loneliness that echoed off the stone walls. My parents called once. My father, We heard about Mark, he said, his voice stiff. Did you hear about the fire, Dad? Did you hear that they tried to kill me? We heard versions, he said. It's a mess, Niamh, a terrible mess. Siobhan is, well, she's in a bad way. She's moving back in with us. Okay, she says you have the money, that you worked with the police to entrap Mark. I worked with the police to stop a gangster, Dad. Mark was the gangster's mule. He's family, Dad said, the old refrain. You don't turn on family. Even when family tries to burn you alive, silence. Then you always were hard, Niamh. Underneath that quiet act, you're hard. He hung up. I put the phone down and looked at my hands. They were rough, scarred, calloused. Hard? Maybe. Or maybe just solid, like the stone. I realized then that I was grieving, not for them, but for the version of them I had invented in my head. The loving parents, the cool big sister. They never existed. I had been fighting to protect a relationship that was already dead. The fire just burned away the mask. I threw myself into the restoration. This time, it wasn't about building a dream, it was about reclaiming a fortress. I installed steel shutters. I upgraded the alarm system. I got another dog, a rescue, a scrappy terrier mix I named Ash to keep Buster company. I stopped looking for approval. I started looking for peace. 3 months later, the court case began. I had to testify. I walked into the courtroom and saw Mark in the dock. He looked thinner. He wore a cheap suit. He wouldn't look at me. Siobhan was in the gallery, sitting with my parents. She was showing now her belly round. She glared at me with such venom I felt the heat of it across the room. I took the stand. I told the truth. I didn't embellish. I didn't dramatize. I just laid out the facts, the map, the threats, the fire, the drive. When the barrister for O'Shea tried to discredit me, tried to paint me as a hysterical woman who had imagined the threats, I shut him down. I didn't imagine the petrol, sir. I didn't imagine the demolition order signed by your client's associate, and I didn't imagine the bruises on my body. The jury believed me. Mark pleaded guilty to fraud and money laundering. He got 4 years. With good behavior, he'd be out in 2. He got a reduced sentence for his cooperation against O'Shea. O'Shea got 12 years. The men in the Range Rover got 8. It was over. Legally, it was over. I walked out of the forecourts in Dublin into the bright sunlight. The Liffey was sparkling. The city was bustling. I was free. But as I walked to my car, I saw my mother standing by the gate. She looked old. She stepped into my path. Are you happy? She asked. Everyone kept asking me that. No, Mum, I'm not happy. I'm safe. There's a difference. You've destroyed your sister's life. She's alone. She has a baby coming. She has no husband. She has you, I said, and she has her freedom, which is more than she would have had if O'Shea had continued. I saved her, Mum. You just can't see it. Don't come to the christening, she said. Don't come to Christmas. We need time. Take all the time you need, I said. I'll be in Wicklow. I drove home. I didn't cry this time. I felt lighter. The cord was cut. The toxic umbilical cord that had fed me guilt for 40 years was finally severed. I pulled into my driveway. The gate was new, solid steel, automated. It opened silently. I drove up the track. The house was finished. The scorch marks were gone. The stone sandblasted back to its honey gray color. The roof was perfect. The wildflowers in the meadow were blooming, a riot of yellow and purple. It was beautiful. It was mine. I parked the car. Buster and Ash came running, tails wagging. I knelt down and hugged them. I looked at the stone barn. It had survived the storm. It had survived the fire. And so had I. But a house is just a building. A home is what you put inside it. And right now, it was just me and the dogs. I walked inside. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the floor. I made a cup of tea. I sat in my favorite chair by the window. I picked up my sketchbook. I had an idea. The derelict land next door. The land Mark had tried to develop. The land O'Shea had forfeited to the state as part of the asset seizure. It was going up for auction next month. It was distressed, cheap. I looked at my bank account. I had the insurance money. I had savings from working like a dog for the last 6 months. And I had a reputation now. The woman who stood up to the mob. My landscaping business was booming. Everyone wanted the iron gardener to design their sanctuary. I picked up my pen. I started to draw. Not houses, not concrete, trees. A community orchard, a sensory garden for the local school, a walking trail. I wasn't going to build a wall. I was going to expand the garden. I was going to buy the land. I was going to take the thing that almost destroyed us, and I was going to turn it into something that would last longer than any of us. But before I could do that, I had one last ghost to exorcise. I went to the drawer where I kept Nana's old things. I found a photo of her standing in the doorway of the barn years ago. She looked fierce and kind. I kept it, Nana, I whispered. I held the line. I felt a warmth in the room. Not the heat of fire, the warmth of approval. I was about to close the drawer when I saw something else. A small velvet box I had tucked away years ago and forgotten about. It wasn't jewelry, it was a key, an old rusted iron key. Nana had given it to me when I was 10. She said, "This opens the secret garden." I always thought she was making it up, a fairy tale for a child. But looking at the map I had retrieved from the council, the old original map from the 1800s that I had used to prove the boundary, I noticed something I had missed in the panic of the war. There was a small walled section marked in the woods down by the stream, the old keep. It wasn't on the digital maps. It was overgrown, lost to time. I looked at the key. I looked at the dogs. "Come on, boys," I said. "Let's go for a walk." I walked down to the stream, the evening light turning the water to gold. I pushed through the briars and the nettles, following the map in my head. And there it was, a wall, hidden behind a curtain of ivy, a stone archway, and a locked wooden door that looked like it hadn't been opened in 50 years. My heart raced. What was in there? I put the key in the lock. It was stiff. I twisted it with both hands. Click. The door groaned open. I stepped inside. It wasn't just a garden. It was a glass house. A Victorian glass house, sunken into the earth to protect it from the wind. The glass was mossy but intact. And inside was a jungle. Ancient ferns, towering palms, orchids growing wild. It was a secret world. And in the center, on a stone bench, was a metal box. I walked over to it. I opened it. Inside was a letter, addressed to me, to Niamh. The handwriting was Nana's. My hands shook as I picked it up. "If you are reading this, you fought for the barn. I knew you would. Sifane has the shine, but you have the stone." I started to cry. This land has a secret, Niamh. It's not just a farm, it's a trust. I read on, and as I read, I realized that the war wasn't over. It had just changed. Nana hadn't just left me a house. She had left me a responsibility. The box contained deeds, not to the farm, but to the water rights, the stream, the aquifer that ran beneath the entire valley. Mark hadn't just wanted the land for houses. O'Shea hadn't just wanted the development. They wanted the water. A massive bottling plant had been proposed in secret 3 years ago. They needed the rights. Nana had hidden them, and now I held them. I looked around the glass house. I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was the guardian of the valley. I wiped my tears. I smiled. "Okay, Nana," I said, "round 2. I walked back up the hill, the key in my pocket. The sun had set, but the stars were coming out. I went into the house and turned on the camera. "So," I said to the lens, "to you. That's how I saved my home. That's how I lost my family. And that's how I found myself." I leaned forward. But the story isn't quite done. Because sometimes when you dig up the past, you find more than just skeletons. You find treasure. And you find a new fight. I took a deep breath. I'm Niamh. I'm 42. I'm a landscape architect. And I'm the owner of the stone barn. And if you think I was tough before, you haven't seen anything yet. I looked at the empty space where Siobhan used to sit in my life. It hurt. It would always hurt. But I would fill it with friends, with dogs, with trees, with purpose. I'm going to turn this place into a sanctuary, not just for me, for everyone. If you want to see how I do it, if you want to see me build the community orchard, if you want to see what was in that glass house, hit subscribe. I smiled, a real, genuine smile, because the best revenge isn't burning them down. It's growing something they can never touch. Thanks for watching. And remember, no matter who tries to pave over your dreams, keep digging. I reached out and covered the lens, darkness, silence, peace. That was the end of the video, but it's not the end of my night. I'm sitting here now, the camera off, looking at the comments rolling in. "Your sister is a monster. I'm so glad you're safe. Where is this? It's beautiful. You inspire me." I feel a connection to these strangers that I don't feel to my own blood. I take a sip of wine, my phone buzzes. Unknown number. I hesitate. Is it Savon? Is it a reporter? Is it one of O'Shea's men left over? I answer. "Hello? Niamh O'Connor?" A woman's voice, professional, crisp. "Yes, this is the production team for Restoration Home on Channel 4. We saw your video. It's trending. We'd love to talk to you about a series." I laugh, a loud belly laugh that startles the dogs. A TV show Sivan would have killed for a TV show. She wanted the fame. She wanted the spotlight. And I got it by being the one thing she never was, authentic. "I'm listening," I say.
I look out at the dark valley. The moon is rising over the stone barn. It's not perfect. The scars are there. The memories are there. But it's standing. And so am I.
So, that's my story. It's messy, it's painful, it's not the fairy tale I thought I was building, but it's real. And if you're out there fighting your own war, holding your own line against the people who are supposed to love you, don't give up. The stone is stronger than the fire, and the garden always grows back. What would you have done? Would you have handed over the drive? Would you have saved your sister? Let me know. I really want to hear your side. Because for a long time, I thought I was crazy. Now I know I was just awake. It's been 18 months since I sat in this chair, covered in soot, and told you how my brother in law tried to burn my life down. 18 months is a long time. Long enough for a garden to cycle through 2 full seasons. Long enough for a baby to be born and learn to walk. Long enough for the scars on my hands to fade into thin white lines that I only notice when the weather turns cold. I honestly didn't think I'd be making another one of these sit down videos. I thought I'd go back to posting time lapses of planting beds and tutorials on how to point stone walls. But looking at the comments on that last video, thousands of you from all over the world asking what happened next and did you ever speak to her again, I realized I owe you the rest of the story because you were the ones who watched me when I was invisible. You were the witnesses when I had none. So pour a cup of tea, let's talk about the aftermath, because the movies always end when the bad guy goes to jail and the hero stands in the sunset. Real life isn't like that. Real life is the Tuesday morning after the trial. Real life is the silence in a house that's too big for one person. Real life is the complicated, messy business of healing. First, the house. The stone barn is finished, fully, properly finished. And if you watched the Channel 4 series, you saw the glossy version. You saw the drone shots of the wildflower meadow in full bloom, the sun glinting off the restored slate roof, the shots of me looking stoic in my wellies. It looked perfect. But what the cameras didn't show was the nights I spent awake, jumping at the sound of a fox screaming in the woods, thinking it was a siren. They didn't show the panic attacks I had every time I smelled bonfire smoke from a neighbor's yard. Trauma doesn't just vanish because you won the court case. It lives in your nervous system, it lives in the walls. For the first 6 months, I slept with Ash, my terrier, in the bed with me, my hand resting on his flank so I could feel him breathing. I installed so many security lights that my property looks like a landing strip at night. It took me a year to take the plywood down from the windows and truss the glass again. But the garden saved me. Remember that key, the one Nana left me? The one that opened the secret Victorian glass house in the woods? That became my therapy. I spent the winter down there hacking away 60 years of brambles. It was brutal work. I was down in that sunken garden, freezing cold, covered in mud, wrestling with ivy that was as thick as my arm, and I loved every second of it because that glass house was a metaphor I couldn't ignore. It was something beautiful and fragile that had been neglected, buried, and almost forgotten. But the structure was still there. The iron ribs were rusted, but they held. The glass was dirty, but it still let the light in. I found things in there, not just plants. I found Nana's old potting bench. I found clay pots with her thumbprint still pressed into the rim. I realized that she had come down here to escape too, maybe to escape the noise of a busy farmhouse, or the demands of being a mother and a wife. This was her sanctuary before it was mine, and as I restored it, scrubbing the moss off the glass, replanting the ferns, I felt like I was having a conversation with her. I wasn't just the granddaughter who got the house. I was the woman who understood her soul. And that brings me to the water. You remember the deeds I found in the metal box? The water rights to the aquifer? I thought that was just a nice historical detail. I was wrong. It was the shield that saved the entire valley. About 4 months after Mark went to prison, I got a letter. Not from him, from a multinational beverage corporation. They were polite, they were corporate, they wanted to partner with me to steward the water resource on my land. They offered me a buyout, a lot of money, enough money that the old Niamh, the scared Niamh, the broke Niamh might have taken it. They wanted to drill a borehole. They wanted to suck the water out from under the stone barn, bottle it in plastic, and ship it around the world. They had already bought the rights to the surrounding farms the land O'Shea had forfeited. They owned the donut, but I owned the hole, and without my access rights, they couldn't drill. I said no. They came back with a higher offer. I said no. They sent lawyers. They threatened to petition for a compulsory purchase order, claiming it was in the public interest for job creation. But here's the thing about surviving an arson attempt and taking down a gangster. Corporate lawyers don't scare you anymore. A letter on fancy bonded paper is terrifying when you're a people pleaser. When you're the queen of ashes, it's just fire starter. I used the channel I didn't go to court quietly. I made a video standing in the stream, holding the deed Nana left me. I showed the crayfish in the water. I showed the moss. I explained exactly what would happen to the water table if they started pumping industrial quantities. I asked you guys to help, and you did. You flooded their social media. You signed petitions. The local council, who had been so eager to approve Mark's housing estate, suddenly realized that the political wind had shifted. They didn't want to be the ones who let a corporation dry out the YouTube Gardeners Valley. The company backed down. They withdrew the application. I donated the water rights to a newly formed community trust. I still own the land, but the water belongs to the valley now. It can never be sold. It can never be bottled. It belongs to the trees, the deer, and the neighbors who once thought I was crazy and now bring me rhubarb pies on Sundays. But you want to know about the family. I know you do. It's the question everyone asks. Did Siobhan ever apologize? Have you seen the baby? Siobhan gave birth to a baby boy 6 months after the fire. His name is Cillian. I found out on Facebook. My cousin posted a photo. He's beautiful. He has the Cullen nose, but he has Siobhan's eyes. My eyes. I stared at that photo for an hour. I traced the curve of his little cheek on my screen. I felt that pull, that deep biological tug that says, this is your blood. I wanted to get in my car. I wanted to drive to my parents' house, knock on the door, and hold him. I wanted to be the cool Auntie Niamh who builds him tree houses and teaches him the names of bugs. But I didn't go because Siobhan never called. She sent the police away when they tried to update her on Mark's safety. She refused to read my victim impact statement. She holds on to her narrative because it's the only thing keeping her upright. In her story, I am the jealous sister who destroyed her family out of spite. If she admits I was the victim, she has to admit that her husband was a monster and that she was an accomplice. That's too heavy a load for her to carry. So she blames me. It's easier. I did send a gift. I couldn't help myself. I carved a little wooden fox out of a piece of oak that had survived the fire in the hallway. I sanded it until it was as smooth as silk. I wrapped it in brown paper and posted it to my parents' address. No note, just the fox. 2 weeks later, I got a card. It was Savon's handwriting. Stiff, spiky. It said, "Thank you for the toy. He likes it. Mark has been moved to a jagged facility in the Midlands. He asks about you." That was it. No, I'm sorry. No, how are you? Just a receipt and a reminder of Mark. He asks about you. I burned the card in the wood stove. I watched the ink curl and vanish. I don't need to know that Mark asks about me. I don't need his guilt or his performative remorse. I have maintained the boundary, and it is the hardest thing I have ever done. People talk about going no contact like it's a simple switch you flip. It's not. It's a daily amputation. It's waking up on Christmas morning and knowing they are all together, eating turkey, opening presents, and you are not there. It's knowing that my nephew is growing up without me. It's knowing that my parents are getting older and I'm missing the twilight of their lives. But then I look at the scars on my hands. I remember the sound of the petrol igniting. I remember the look in Savon's eyes when she told me I should have let them build the road. Safety isn't just about locks on doors. It's about who you let into your heart. I realize that I can love them from a distance. I can wish them well. I can hope Cillian grows up to be a good man, loved and safe. But I cannot set myself on fire to keep them warm. Not anymore. And Mark? He's due for parole in 8 months. I was terrified of that date for a long time. I thought about selling the barn. I thought about moving to New Zealand. But then I thought, no, why should I leave? I am the one who stayed. I am the one who built. I went to the Garda station and updated my restraining order. It's permanent now. If he steps foot in Wicklow, he goes back inside. But more importantly, I realized he has no power here anymore. The land he tried to steal is now a community nature reserve. The house he tried to burn is a registered heritage structure. The woman he tried to bully is a public figure with a platform and the resources to fight back. He's just a ghost, and I don't believe in ghosts. So what is my life now? It's busy. My landscaping business has transformed. I don't do corporate courtyards anymore. I design healing gardens. I work with hospitals, hospices, and women's shelters. I help people create spaces where they can feel safe, just like I did. I wrote a book. It's coming out next spring. It's called Root and Stone. It's about the house, yes, but it's mostly about resilience. It's about how nature teaches us to survive trauma. You cut a plant back and it grows stronger. You burn a forest and the seeds that have been dormant for decades finally sprout in the ash. And I'm not alone. I know I said I was the queen of the ashes and that sounded very lonely and dramatic. But a garden attracts life. I have neighbors who check on me. I have a team of young gardeners who work with me, eager to learn. I have Buster and Ash who are currently sleeping by the fire, snoring loudly. And I met someone. I wasn't looking. I really wasn't. He's a stonemason. He came to help me repair the archway in the secret garden. He has rough hands and a quiet voice, and he doesn't care about my YouTube channel. He cares about the grain of the granite. He knows the story. He knows the baggage. He didn't run. It's new. It's slow. We're taking it one stone at a time. But it's nice to have someone to drink tea with in the glass house while the rain hammers down on the roof. I want to leave you with this. When I started this story, I asked you to subscribe if you've ever had to stand up to your family. I read your comments. I read the stories of people who were disowned for who they love, people who were stolen from, people who were made to feel small so others could feel big. It broke my heart, but it also stitched it back together because I realized that this isn't just my story. It's a universal battle, the battle to define who you are, separate from where you came from. We are taught that family is everything, that blood is thicker than water. But I've learned that the water of the womb is static. It's what you're given. The water of the covenant, the bonds you choose, the friends you make, the boundaries you set, that is the water that sustains you. That is the living stream. I don't hate Savan. I don't hate Mark. I feel a profound, distant pity for them. They are trapped in a cycle of wanting more money, more status, more validation. They will never be full. I am sitting in a house that smells of wood smoke and drying herbs. I am wearing muddy boots. I have a bank account that is healthy but not overflowing, and I have never felt richer. Nana was right. The land knows who loves it, and life knows who shows up for it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for believing me. Thank you for being the army I didn't know I had. I'm going to go now. The stonemason is coming over, and we're going to plant the winter bulbs. Daffodils, hundreds of them, so that when spring comes, even if the winter was hard, the ground will erupt in gold. Take care of yourselves, protect your peace, and remember, if you build it strong enough, not even fire can bring it down. This is Niamh, signing off from the Stone Barn. Goodbye.